Graduate Student Wellness Roundtable hosted by the Graduate Student Association. My name is Ashley Ryan. I am the current Student Wellness Coordinator at the GSA. And today I want to thank all of our panelists for coming out and making time to talk to us about their different groups and departments and the initiatives for grad students that are happening. So today we have Jennifer McCorriston joining us, and she chairs the Wellness Collaborative Advisory Committee. We have Cheri Bilitz here she is the Director of Counselling Services. We have John Hirdes, and he is the chair of the Committee on Student Mental Health, and Jeff Casello, who is the Associate Vice President of Graduate Students and Postdoctoral Affairs at the GSPA. Just a heads up for everyone who is here, this session is being recorded. So if you want to go back and find information that you might have missed or want to double check, or if you have a friend who may have missed the session who wants information, the recording will be posted on the GSA website. Before we move any further, I'd like to do a territorial acknowledgement. So we acknowledge that we live and work on the traditional territory of the Neutral, Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee peoples. The University of Waterloo is situated on the Haldimand Tract, the land promised to the Six Nations that includes 6 miles on each side of the Grand River. Just to go over a bit about how this session is going to go. So I already provided the introduction, but Jennifer is going to jump in next to talk about the Okanagan Charter and kind of what it is. If you don't know what it is already, that's okay, because you're going to learn about it today. And then John is going to come in to talk about the Committee on Student Mental Health. And then we have Cheri, who will be talking about Counselling Services. And then Jeff will speak on the Office of Graduate Studies and Postdoctoral Affairs. And then Jennifer will talk again about the Wellness Collaborative Advisory Committee. And then we have some discussion that we're going to go through. And if there are any questions from the audience that pop up throughout, we'll be addressing those at the end, but you can type it in whenever. And Cindy, the GSA VP of Administration, is going to kind of be moderating that, and we'll bring those questions up later. Okay, and I also just asked that all the panelists, when you're doing your presentations, just try please to keep it at the 8-minute mark so that we're able to get everyone in and also get that conversation in. All right, and Jennifer, take it away.
Sure. Hello, everyone. So as Ashley said, I work in health promotion and campus wellness, and I'm going to just start off by talking about the Okanagan Charter and the university's commitment to signing the Okanagan Charter. So the one thing I wanted to just say is give some context. So the President's Advisory Committee on Student Mental Health back in 2017, when they did their report, recommendation 34 was actually to sign the charter. And I know John's going to be talking much more probably after myself about COSM and some of the other recommendations, but I think it's important to recognize that that was the impetus of the charter. By signing that and making that recommendation, it was the recognition that we were going to move away from the perspective in which mental health was simply the responsibility of a few professionals on campus to a healthy campus, which is the business of all of us that live, learn, and work here. So in 2018, President Hamdalapur signed the charter, and by doing so, what we were committing to was using a wellness lens in our work and our policies and procedures. We also committed to developing this mechanism or strategy called the Wellness Collaborative, and I'll talk about that in my presentation later, and just always promoting wellness, whether it's through education, through assessment and learning, and through innovation and pilot projects. So next slide, please, Ashley. Okay, I needed the next slide.
Is this the next slide? My screen froze for a second.
Oh yeah, no worries. So what is the Okanagan Charter then? So it's a framework that reflects latest concepts and processes and principles in health promoting universities. And it started in 2015, mostly from our universities out west like UBC and SFU, but it's adopted from a larger international charter called the Ottawa Charter in Health Promotion, which talks about this very preventative, proactive, you might use the word upstream approach to how we do health and wellness. And sorry, next slide.
I don't know why my screen keeps freezing.
There we go. Okay. So what does it mean then? Because the charter is a piece of paper. So what is in that piece of paper? And again, it talks about infusing health, not only from services and supports by professionals, but into our everyday operations, how we think about our business, how we infuse it into academia. It also talks about the charter is not just about students, it's about everyone on the campus community, those who live, learn, and work here. So we are a community and all of our health and wellness is important. And it's also about creating campus cultures of compassion and equity. So what I like about the charter is even though it has a health and wellness focus, it links the sustainability, health equity, and sees those things as very interconnected. So it has this sort of social ecological approach to wellness and the wider society. And so the next slide I'm going to show, I like to use this as an analogy because it's basically when we approach health and wellness, it's not just about individuals and, creating the supports and knowledge and skills, but it's about looking at the supportive environment that they live. So I use this frog in the pond analogy. So if Ashley can go to the next slide, where if we had a couple frogs acting strangely.
Sorry, my screen keeps freezing.
No worries. Would it be easier for me? I have mine available. Would it be easier for me to just advance my slides?
Sure, we'll try that.
Okay, let me see if I can share my screen real quick. There we go.
Tech glitches. Wouldn't be an online event without those.
So I'll just go back to this one and show the slideshow. Okay, no, let me move back. So hopefully everyone can see this here. Okay, this might be easier. So this is the analogy I always say, right? So if the frogs in a pond started behaving strangely, our first reaction would not be to punish them or to treat them individually. Instinctively, we'd wonder what was going on in the pond. So I think that's what the Okanagan Charter really speaks to, is addressing the culture of the university and the supportive environment that we can create. So by signing the charter, it really says wellness is important for everyone. It's everyone's responsibility on campus to do this work, whether you have it in your job description or not. And it allows us to have a common language in terms of how we plan and the vision that we have. And the nice thing about the charter too, is it takes this participatory approach to health and wellness. So not only is it about senior leaders driving this work, but it's also engaging everyone from the bottom up, whether that's students, the role that you play on campus, frontline staff, to take ownership of this work. And the charter empowers everyone on campus to take ownership of this work. And then finally, I think by signing the charter, it recognizes that health and social wellness or social issues are really complex, but we do have hope that and I like this quote, communities are complex, people, relationships, systems, and even the physical spaces are constantly changing. Hope plans for change using an innovative and flexible approach that rewards creativity and learning, and even learning through failure. So as complex as wellness is, we are hopeful that as a university, as a post-secondary institution, we can make a difference, and we want to make a difference for students to prepare the next generation of those that go out into the workforce with having the right skills and feeling supported in their next phase of life. By signing the charter, the other great thing is we're now part of a health promoting campuses network. There's almost 30 post-secondary institutions in Canada that have signed the charter. And what this does is it provides opportunities to network and learn. So we meet virtually, we learn from each other. And by signing the charter, it's not about competing with other post-secondary institutions, but working together. Because when we talk about these complex social issues, we shouldn't be competing as post-secondary institutions. We should be leveraging each other. So I will stop sharing my screen there.
Thank you, Jennifer. Okay, I'm gonna try this again.
Back over.
All right, let's see if I can get this working in a better way. Not sure why this is giving me struggles. That's not what I was sharing. Sorry, everyone, bear with me for a second. Let's try this again.
Perhaps if it's easier, if John, you have your slides ready.
Yeah, you know what, if the panelists are okay, if you have your slides, we'll just individually have to slide share then, because mine is not wanting to work apparently. Thank you so much.
Okay, is that showing up okay?
Yes.
All right, I'm gonna just move that to. All right, well, great. Thank you, everyone, for having us. This is a great opportunity to meet with you about all the work happening on campus related to student mental health and wellness. I'm John Hirdes. I chair the Committee on Student Mental Health. I'm a professor in the School of Public Health and Health Systems, and research on mental health and mental health services is one of my main priority areas of my research career. So I've been delighted to have served for the last several years as the chair of the Committee on Student Mental Health. And I can say that grad students are exceedingly well represented on the committee by both Ashley and our graduate student at large on the committee as well. So we're delighted to have this opportunity to give you an update on what's happening with the COSM committee. So COSM was struck in response to the President Advisory Committee on Student Mental Health report that was released in March 2018. So that's 3 years ago now. And COSM was established as an implementation committee to implement all 36 recommendations of the PAC-SMH report. As chair of the committee, I report directly to the president and provost on the activities of COSM. So it has linkages into the most senior mechanisms of the university, and we also report to the Board of Governors on a regular basis. So there's a great deal of interest at all levels in the university in the work of COSM and getting these recommendations implemented. The committee is struck with a very broad range of different stakeholders in it. So we have 5 student representatives, including from the 2 major student associations, an international student representative and 2 students at large, one an undergraduate and a graduate representative. We have representatives from each of the 6 faculties present, senior administration staff, including Chris Reed, and Walter Middlestad, who's the Director of Campus Wellness, and Cheri and several others on our meeting today are either active parts as formal members of COSM or have participated in COSM processes. We also have linkages to external community partners and alumni. And this composition has been really important in order to get this work done, to get these recommendations implemented, but also it reflects Jennifer's point that mental health and wellness is a shared responsibility of all of us. It's not just one specific group that has to get these recommendations done. We have to and have had to work together collectively in order to meet our shared objectives of getting these implementations in place. So this is just a summary of all the recommendations that have been completed so far in terms of their implementation, either as an initiative with a fixed endpoint or having put in place ongoing mechanisms for dealing with these recommendations. The more important place for you to go is this website that I've linked here on the Mental Health Wellness website. That'll give you all the details you'd like on the recommendations, what was done, and what stage they're at. But here's the work left to do. We're working on a number of recommendations still. Some are broad-based, so like recommendation 1 deals with inclusion of a mental health framework as a policy lens for both policies and procedures on campus, but also development of new or existing programs. Some are practical in nature, so changing the centralized system for verification of illness forms. Some deal with the way that students and faculty interact with each other. So for example, having mentorship activities in place or having options for dealing with challenging interactions between graduate supervisors and graduate students or students and their instructors. And then others are around awareness and training and supporting dialogue and professional development. As we've seen here, we're taking a look at self-help or self-assessment mechanisms that people can use to deal with mental health. We're about to send a report to the provincial government recommending adoption of the In It Together report, as well as offering Waterloo as a site that has expertise in issues related to student mental health as a result of COSM, as well as some new training programs. We've had a number of important public events. We did 2 different student mental health forums, one in 2018, where we also announced the adoption of the Okanagan Charter, as well as another one in 2019, where we gave an update on the various efforts that were underway to adopt the recommendations at the time. And then late last year, we had the first virtual conference on student mental health research. That'll become an ongoing event on a regular basis as part of the work of COSM in response to the PAC SMH reports that we continue to support and foster a research environment to support work related to student mental health. Now, as I said earlier, there's 2 kinds of examples of work that we would consider to be completed. Some are recommendations where there was a very clear, specific, tangible action to do something. So signing the Okanagan Charter and setting out a set of commitments to the principles related to the Okanagan Charter was a very tangible activity to do, and it becomes a part of ongoing life in the campus. Establishing a wellness collaborative was an outcome of that effort to join the Okanagan Charter. Then there's a whole variety of different types of training materials and programs that have been developed over the course of the last year, dealing with a variety of different topics. And then we've also joined a post-secondary partnership around substance and alcohol use and addictions. But there's many recommendations that we've designated as complete, but it's complete in the sense that we've put in place a mechanism that will have an ongoing set of activities on campus. So for example, recommendations related to policies and procedures isn't a one-time thing. It's how we'll deal with policies and procedures in the future. There's recommendations around how we design and rejuvenate physical space on campus, or commitments to coordinating and supporting peer support networks and mentoring activities are all recommendations that will designate that initial work is done with respect to COSM oversight, but these will be things that become a permanent, lasting part of the university life. So one of the really important recommendations that we've gotten started on, but we'll need to continue on, is around this idea of an open dialogue with students, staff, faculty on campus around mental health and well-being issues in 6 different priority areas. So this is just a bit of an overview of the kinds of topics that different groups have been working on related to these priority themes. And you can see there's a great deal of activity has been started around these priority themes, but this will continue on as part of the ongoing life of the campus. And this forum today is a great example of the kind of dialogues that we want to have on campus around mental health issues. We're at the point that we're about at the end of the mandate of COSM as it's currently configured. So in May 21, we'll probably be at a point that we've finished our work on the PAC SMH recommendations. At least that's my expectation of where we'll be. And we're putting in place a new mechanism to deal on a more forward-looking basis with emerging challenges that we need to face. So COSM's work was really, in some sense, looking backward to that set of 36 PAC SMH recommendations and making sure we do all the things that the people that worked so hard on that report recommended we do. But now it's time for us to sort of look forward in terms of new challenges and opportunities that we're facing for us. I don't think we can underestimate the magnitude of the impact of COVID-19 on mental health in the general population, and that will be true for students as well. And so we'll need to think about ways to deal with the various challenges posed by the pandemic. There's an opportunity to implement a new standard on mental health of post-secondary students developed by the Canadian Standards Association and the Mental Health Commission of Canada. I think that's something that we should be doing on campus. Then we've got all those ongoing recommendations from PAC SMH that I've just described. And we need to think about how the work of people interested in enhancing and supporting student mental health articulates with other campus-wide initiatives, like, for example, the President's Anti-Racism Task Force, that we need to also now think about ways to deal with other initiatives that are underway that overlap or relate to student mental health, but weren't part of the original PAC SMH recommendations. So with that, I'll stop and pass it over to the next person, Ashley.
Thank you, John. Okay, and next up is Cheri.
Okay.
Let me just stop sharing my screen here. There we go.
Okay. Okay, can everyone see my slides? Okay, great. Perfect. Thanks for having me. As Ashley introduced me, my name is Cheri Bilitz, and I'm the Director of Counselling Services. So I'll just go through my slides. I'll see if I can, sorry, just trying to figure out how to move them along. Here we are. Okay. So just a little bit about our team composition. So we're part of a larger campus wellness team. So part of that team is actually Jennifer McCorriston, who you heard speak first. So we've got health services and health promotion that make up campus wellness. We've got 2 main sites. So we've got our Needles Hall location and our health services on the 2nd floor. Our team consists of 30 clinicians. And about 6 admin staff and counseling services. And we also are a training center for residents and interns. So every year we have a pool of Masters of Social Work students. We have residents, psychology residents, and also registered psychotherapists as part of our team. So we provide services using a step care model, which is similar to what other universities offer as well. So how that works is when you first phone in, right now, especially during COVID, so you phone in and speak with reception, who would book you an appointment with our intake specialist. So they meet with people for somewhere between 15 minutes to 30 minutes, depending on the nature of the person's call and supports that the student may need. And from there is determine what resources would be most suited for the student based on what's presenting. So that could be a mixture of things. It could be some things within our service, some things within some community services. But usually we start with the least intrusive type of service. So for some people that could be workshops that are available, and we're finding, especially during the pandemic, some of our workshops that are more tailored to addressing mental health during the pandemic have been very well attended. We could have about 40 students on a specific a workshop at a time. Also single session therapy. So some people may call in and want to speak with someone and have a longer, more intensive session. So they would be offered single session therapy. For some, they may need something more than single session therapy. So they may attend brief goal focused therapy. So usually that's up to about 6 sessions. We find most students use our service for about 4 sessions, but of course there's a range in how many sessions students may need. We also offer what we call support coordination. So that would be students who need help navigating the internal systems of the university. So they may have different policies that they maybe don't understand. So our staff would help them navigate those and connect with different parts of the university. And sometimes that support coordination is used to connect them to external supports as well. So it might be connecting them with other services in the broader community. We also have psychotherapy groups. And then we also have sessions that are set aside daily for crisis and more emergency situations that arise. So if a student calls in and they're expressing suicidal thoughts, they would be seen same day. So we have staff who have time set aside in their schedule every day for that. We also have a specialized care team. So that would include members across campus wellness. So it might include psychiatry, it could include physicians, a mental health nurse, a case manager, counselors, psychologists. So it's a team that work together to support students with more complex needs. So I did include the link there so that everybody can access those. So some that are grad student specific. So all the ones that I just named would be available for all students. But we also have embedded counselors in every faculty. So if you're a grad student from a specific faculty, there would be a counselor who would have more knowledge of processes in that faculty. For some, they're embedded right on site. So for pharmacy and architecture, there's a counselor that is on site, obviously not during COVID times, but during regular times. But if you were to phone in, you would learn of the counselor who's available from that faculty. We also have some clinicians with increased knowledge of grad student concerns as well as international student concerns. So we're looking at formalizing who some people on our team will be, so that when a grad student calls in and it's specific to a grad student concern, that we would have specific clinicians available. We have our grad student conversation circle. So that's a drop-in group that students can attend, and that's been very well attended during these remote times. And then we're also hoping to involve grad students on our Campus Wellness Student Advisory Committee. So we've been talking with both Cindy and Ashley about that, and would be looking for representation from grad students to be part of the Campus Wellness Advisory, just to give feedback into our services so that we can continuously improve what we're providing to grad students. And we've also been asked recently about some specialized seminars, so some different topics such as TA burnout, international grad students working remotely. So some specific topics that we're hearing would be helpful to provide some webinars on those. So I just had a slide just about different resources that are available. So some of our closest partners would be the Canadian Mental Health Association, the Sexual Assault Support Center, and then we work closely with Empower Me as well. Many grad students use Empower Me in addition to our service. And that's it. So I'll stop sharing my screen.
Thank you so much, Cheri. There is a question that pops up, but we're going to answer it at the end with all the other questions, just so the student knows that it will be answered later, okay? And then next up, we have Jeff, who will be speaking on behalf of the GSPA initiatives.
Yep, thanks very much, Ashley, for having me, and thanks to everyone for joining us today. Let me get my screen shared, and you can let me know if you're seeing things well. Yes? Seeing the slides? Yep.
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, so I do lead graduate studies and postdoctoral affairs. And so I thought what I would do is I would spend a couple of minutes today telling you about GSPA. I'm not sure if everyone is familiar with who we are in graduate studies. And then I wanted to identify some places where GSPA is specifically trying to support our graduate students. And I think I'm actually quite pleased to hear about the Okanagan Charter, because obviously we are not a healthcare provider directly, GSPA, but we are diligent, I think, in working towards creating a community and a culture that is advancing student wellness and wellness for the entire campus community. So I hope that maybe the takeaway message for my slides will be the way in which GSPA is trying to situate itself in terms of advancing the initiatives that are mandated by our inclusion in the Okanagan Charter. So I'm going to talk about a few things, financial things, because these are the areas where we believe that graduate students face regularly will influence graduate students' well-being. So certainly in financial issues with their relationship with their supervisors, just in the logistics of the way that the university is run, and when there are challenges that arise for graduate students, how those get resolved. And of course, with a specific lens on inclusion, equity, and diversity. So what are GSPA's core functions? There's a lot of text on the slide. I normally have a rule about minimal words on my slides, but I'm not going to speak to everything on the slides. I wanted to put all of this down and leave it as a resource for graduate students. You may wish to come back to it if you're curious about what GSPA does. So we have 5 key groups in our team. We begin throughout the student life cycle. So we start out with marketing and recruitment. So we're trying to build identity for our graduate student programs and attract top quality students. We then support students through the admissions process. When a student is with us, we help with awards and funding. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the sort of the regularized scholarships that we have for our graduate students, as well as things that are unique for graduate students who are experiencing financial challenges. We also maintain graduate students' records and information. And of course, we have a team that is dedicated to communications for graduate students. So that's sort of logistically what GSPA does. But I think that this is more importantly, really what GSPA considers its mandate to be. And that's really to lead on the campus, to create a campus community that catalyzes really exceptional experiences for and among graduate students. I think sometimes what gets overlooked when we talk about student wellness is the importance of peer-to-peer supports in wellness. And we are working in that space as well. So I wanted to explicitly speak to that. And of course, GSPA is graduate studies and postdoctoral affairs. So it's important that we don't lose track of our postdocs. There's about 400 of those who are with us normally on campus. So how do we do that? Well, you can think about a graduate, the way that I think about it is that every time a graduate student interacts with the university, that's an opportunity to either positively reinforce their experience at the university, or it can unfortunately be a negative experience with the university. And so my team is very student focused and it's very common for us to look at things through a student lens. And so we have been working diligently to make sure that if you approach us with a concern, that we're responsive, and we're responsive in a timely way. I know that throughout the pandemic, graduate students who presented virtually again at the center or in person at the center have been being connected to my team remotely. And what I gather, what I'm told, and I hope that this is what those who are attending today have experienced, is that the quality of service and the timeliness of service has been exceptional from my team. So I hope that that's the case. And if it isn't, we're certainly eager to learn that there are ways that we can improve. We're also working through policy, and there's a number of important things that are ongoing. So policy 30 is the policy that governs the relationship between TAs and instructors. This has been in draft for some time. It's getting finalized through work with me and the Secretariat, and it was written collaboratively with graduate students and is getting ready to be distributed for consultation. We have informal graduate student community, university committees. That includes graduate operations as well as the Graduate Student Relations Committee. So if there are issues related to graduate students and graduate studies, those are the places where GSPA is convening committees that are intended to help support those things. We are really interested in providing timely support, so making sure that we can react to where you are in your program. So if there are things where you need support with onboarding, we work closely with the Student Success Office this year to ramp up our onboarding and transition programming. If you are a PhD student and you are getting through your candidacy exams, we have a time to celebrate that with you. If you are at the point where you're disseminating research, we have an opportunity to do that through GSPA programming. If you're interested in career development and so on, that's the things that the GSPA is working towards. And I think maybe the most important thing is really to establish and reinforce expectations around the way that we expect graduate students in graduate studies to be administered with a lens of how can we help and how can we promote student wellness. And that's really very much what's going forward. Now you might ask why there's a picture of these two women on your screen with a blanket. I just show you this. A couple of my colleagues in the office began a program where they were crocheting blankets and hats for graduate students who are becoming new parents, and sharing these as part of a congratulatory package to our graduate students. And this has taken off. And so now there are a number of staff members who are doing these expressions of love for our graduate student community. And I just hope it represents the level of empathy and compassion and really excitement and enthusiasm my team has for graduate studies. So let's talk specifically about things that we're doing. If you're a graduate student and you find yourself in financial challenges, we have a number of programs that are intended to address specific circumstances. The first is a contingency bursary that is dedicated to international students. If you find yourself with needing financial support as an international student, you can apply for our contingency bursary. For domestic students, the same is available to you, and it can be combined also with support from the province. We have a medical leave award that we created in the last couple of years. So if you were a graduate student and you are being funded by the university and then you become unwell mentally or physically, we didn't want the next term to be a discontinuation of your funding. So we introduced this award to continue your funding even if you were inactive for medical reasons. GSPA also administers support for parents when they go on leave after having or adopting a child. We have a daycare bursary, so if you have children in daycare, the university can help to support that. We support the dissemination of your research, and in the most recent years, we've created funds or added to funds for thesis completion. So if you find yourself as one of those students who are at the end of their programming, potentially beyond term limits and are needing financial support to get over the finish line, these funds in partnership with the GSA and with GSEF are designed to do that for you. What have we been doing around the supervisory relationship? Well, I've been chairing a task force that has looked at what is happening in terms of how the university sets expectations for what is good quality graduate student supervision. We're also looking at how we can reward those supervisors who are very good supervisors and put in place supports for those supervisors who have a need to be supported in their supervisory role. And of course, really important to that is some training. And we've been doing training for graduate student supervisors along with CTE now for the last 6 years. We rewrote recently the Guide to Graduate Research and Student Supervision. That link is there for you. And if you go there, there is some, I think, some very practical and some very policy-driven language that helps establish the expectations between supervisors and graduate students and the graduate community. And if you find yourself in a struggle in your graduate studies, this guide can be really useful for giving you a foundation to ask difficult questions about the way your supervisory or your program has been operating. We also realized that sometimes supervisory relationships go bad, and we wanted to codify what happens in that case. And so we have created in the last year language that sets out the university's responsibilities in those cases, including the continuation of funding for students who are in search of a new supervisor after their supervisory relationship has has not continued. And lastly, we realize the importance of good communications in terms of keeping students well, and we have established now requirements for how the program is to communicate, program and supervisors are to communicate with graduate students on their progress. So what we don't want to have happen is for a student to commit great amount of time with us and then ultimately be told that their work isn't up to snuff, or on the other side, for a student to be struggling for a very long time with unresponsive program. And so these guidelines are now requiring people to have these conversations about the way things are progressing. I'm assuming that Bing tells me my time is nearly up. So I'm on to my last slide. And I think it's my last slide, yes. And I just want to cover these things quickly. So what have we been doing for students who are experiencing not financial or supervisory troubles, but the things that are maybe more academic in nature? And the first thing is that we've worked with Accessibility Services to make sure that the accommodation guidelines that were written that began, if I can be candid, only looking at course-related accommodations, also included things that were specific to graduate students. So around graduate milestones, that was really important. The petition process, when a student is seeking exemptions from university regulations, that was largely aimed at undergraduate students again, and we've been careful to rewrite those processes in a way that accommodates graduate students and provides a clear path for graduate students and, of course, protects their privacy as they go through that process. We've cleared up some language around term limits for graduate students. Our tone of our communications around that term limits was, I would say, not positive. It concentrated on the penal effects of not being within term limits. Now we are moving towards language that is explaining the motivation for and requiring positive outcomes from conversations related to term limits. We have worked on thesis embargoes. So we have students who are doing some really difficult research in parts of the world where the publication of that research might end up being problematic for students or their families. And we've gone ahead and protected those. We've also worked with the names on a names project that is intended to protect and be respectful of students' privacy in terms of their gender and their identity. So there's a lot on the go. We recognize that the way that students interact with the university, with their supervisors, financially, these are key elements to graduate students' well-being. And so we've taken on a number of these initiatives, and I hope graduate students will see that we are progressing. We certainly acknowledge that there's more to do, but I hope that the trajectory I've presented today has been useful. So thanks, Ashley.
Thank you, Jeff. Okay, last out of our presenters, we have Jennifer, who will be talking again about the Wellness Collaborative Advisory Committee.
Okay, so I guess you get to see me again. Let's just find, oh, sorry. I think what happened is, I think I shut down my slides after my first one. So let me just, sorry about that, everyone. I will bring it right up. Okay. All right, there we go. All right, I will skip through all of these. So I'm going to talk about something I alluded to earlier, which is, what is the mechanism in which we operationalize the Okanagan Charter and some of our mandate. And so we've created this strategy, whether you call it a strategy, whether you call it a group of people and a committee, it's called the Wellness Collaborative. And we use it as a noun, where it's about an organized group of people or entities who collaborate towards a particular goal. And so the group came together, I think it was August 2019 was its first meeting, and it's almost 20 stakeholders. So you do have 2 GSA or 2 graduate student reps there, undergraduate students. And because I've always said the Okanagan Charter supports the wellness of everyone on campus, it is a mix of people that come there to represent employee health and wellness concerns and student health and wellness concerns. And often they actually do align, but the strategies that you might take to address them might be different based on the supports on campus and what offices are available. So we have 2 executive sponsors, which are Chris Reed and Marilyn Thompson, and they take the issues, or they advocate for us at a senior level. And the mandate of the advisory committee is to communicate, coordinate, and collaborate on health and wellness concerns. So we're there to identify gaps and address them, but to also leverage the great work that's currently happening in health and wellness. There is, as Jeff was just talking about, there is so many offices that see the work that they're doing as impacting the student health and wellness. So we want to, rather than duplicate that effort, we want to promote it and work together more effectively to coordinate and streamline these efforts. And so the principle of the advisory committee, or the Wellness Collaborative, I should say, as a whole, is that it's holistic. So we do have a focus on mental health, but we also see health as a physical health, spiritual health, as social health. It's comprehensive. So it's not only about equipping students or employees with the knowledge and skills, but it's also about looking at the policy and the environment and the culture of the university. And it's inclusive. So again, we recognize that universally we are trying to impact and keep everyone on campus well, but we recognize some groups face disproportionate health and wellness concerns, or they're disproportionately impacted by health and wellness. And there's inequities that we need to address through structural barriers. So we really want to make sure that not only are we offering programs and services equally to everyone, but there are targeted and tailored initiatives that would work with more equity deserving groups. So we spent the first 8 months of our work when we came together as an advisory committee, looking at all our data across campus and working. So GSA has a lot of good health and wellness data, and they presented, and we came up with 5 priority areas that we want to address. So you can see those: sense of belonging, mental wellness, spiritual wellness, supportive environments for active living and healthy eating, and institutional commitment at all levels to wellness. So the other ones probably seem pretty self-explanatory. The one thing I will say about spiritual wellness is it's not just about people who see their spiritual wellness as religion, but we've also had great conversations about spiritual wellness is about people finding purpose and meaning in their life, whether that's through their connection to the earth or through mindfulness. And we're working actually with the Indigenous office to try to incorporate Indigenous ways of knowing of spirituality into our work. And then the other one I just want to touch upon, because people might not know what it means, is when I say institutional commitment at all levels to wellness, this is about, as I've said earlier, having senior leaders understand health and wellness, build it into their job descriptions, build it into the conversations they're having at Senate or board, but then also empowering people as part of their day-to-day work to be able to address wellness concerns. So some of the work we've done to date is we were able to advocate and get wellness priorities as part of the new UW strat plan. So it specifically has an objective there about mobilizing the commitments of the Okanagan Charter. And then some of the other exciting things we've done is we've created a community of practice. And so this is where I say the Wellness Collaborative really is owned by everyone. If you're not on the advisory committee, you can be involved in a number of different ways. So I think we have a community of practice of over about 90 members on campus, maybe even upwards of 100. And it's anyone and everyone who wants to just come talk about wellness and learn what's happening. They meet every couple months. So if you're a student and you really want to be connected in that way, or you're doing research in health and wellness and you want to hear what's happening on campus, this would be a great group to join. We also have wellness champion stories that we promote through our newsletter. So this was, again, the idea that so many people are doing great wellness work on campus, whether that's staff, faculty, students. So we've highlighted champions. We've highlighted some graduate student champions because we want people to be inspired to see, well, if they can do it, I can do it too as part of my work. I don't have to be a health and wellness expert to be doing the wellness work. We also did a meet and move challenge, I believe the fall before the pandemic hit. So I think 2019, where it was trying to get people to move more in their meetings. So whether that was walking or wheeling through like wheelchair accessible meetings. So we did a bit of a challenge with the library. We also, before the pandemic hit, we're starting to do some advocacy on smoke-free campuses and looking at what that would look like in terms of our policies and support. So I know the GSA we did meet with the GSA and provided us with a letter of support for that work. We also put in some language when looking at the presidential nomination process. And so we put in language about what we would like to see in the next president in terms of their view and approach to health and wellness. And I think we're very lucky that the next president is actually has a background in public health. And of course, President Hamdullah has always been very supportive of health and mental health as well. So we want to continue this. Last June, we also did a big event. We had over about 300 people come out to this virtual event on sense of belonging, where we had Dr. Christine Logel, who's a professor here at UW, talk about her work and how do you create sense of belonging in the classroom. So we had a lot of faculty members come out. And we're also currently have a partnership with Central Comms because it came up in our advisory committee that we needed to look at the communication across campus and make sure that we're always having very authentic, empathetic communication that's coming out from the university and really paying attention to our tone that creates a supportive environment. Some of the other work is just last December, we put on an event with our partners, UBC and McGill, that talked about leveraging the charter to bounce forward from our crises. So seeing the collective impact and working together on issues like the pandemic, racism, climate emergency, and as I talked earlier, how these things intersect. So we had Zabine come from the GSA, and she was on our student panel, did a wonderful job bringing the student perspective to that event. We've also launched the Stories of Resiliency campaign. So that's the picture there, where it's really about normalizing failure and how people bounce back. And that, you know, having failure in a certain part of your life at a certain point in your life doesn't define the rest of your life. So I know Ashley has put a story into that campaign, and there's some other graduate students as well. So I would encourage you to go read those stories. They are really inspirational, and they help to ground us all in the fact that we're human, and you know, this is part of the life course. Currently with COSM, we're working on the Mental Health Literacy Certificate Program, which is it's for employees with the benefit that if employees have better mental health literacy, they can do a better job supporting students in their mental health. So it's an equity-focused 6-module program, both synchronous and asynchronous, that we're going to be piloting sometime this year. And then I think what we're really working on currently is diversifying the representation at the advisory committee and consulting with equity deserving groups to make sure, as I said earlier, that we have that lens when we're talking about health and wellness, and recognizing there's lots of structural inequities that we have to address if we're actually addressing health and wellness. So we're currently doing that work. So how you can get involved is, as I said, you can join the Community of Practice or newsletter if you're really interested in staying up to date on the Wellness Collaborative's work. You can come out to any of our events. We're actually probably putting on another leadership series event this spring, which is about centering Indigenous ways of knowing into health and wellness at post-secondary institutions. So we're doing that in partnership with our with the Waterloo Indigenous Student Center, hopefully, and our Indigenous office. And if you want your voice to be heard or you have ideas, you can always contact your graduate student reps on the advisory committee. And I've put their contact there, Ashley Ryan and Tegan Barton, and they can bring forward your ideas for discussion. And because it should be a two-way way of having these discussions and creating action. So I think that's what I wanted to share about the Wellness Collaborative.
Awesome. Thank you, Jennifer. And thank you again to all of our panel members for presenting on your various committees and departments. So now we're going to dive a bit more into some discussion questions that we have, and then we'll discuss those. And then we'll also take the questions that we have that have flown in from the audience. I think unless it doesn't work, we'll see how it goes. I think this will be more of like I'll pose a question and then it could be open floor for anyone to chime in for answers. So the first question that I have for everyone is, how is your office or committee working on addressing issues related to the intersections related to systemic racism, like anti-Blackness, colonialism, such as Indigenous initiatives, the climate emergency, and student health and well-being? So I know that's a huge question, so there's a lot impacted in that, but it's mostly like really thinking about how all of our services and departments and staff on campus, like students are not just students at the University of Waterloo. They have all individual needs and different backgrounds. So I just wondering if you could talk about that. And I know some of you have already talked a bit about in your presentations already, but yeah, if there's anything else that you'd like to add or answer for that, go ahead.
We're all being respectful of each other's time, I think, but maybe I'll jump in to start and then that'll get everyone going. So I'll just say that, we perceive graduate students as the most diverse and hopefully the most inclusive group of students on the university campus. 40% of our community is international, representing a whole host of diverse ethnicities, heritages, cultures, lived experiences, and we're eager to celebrate that. We have been working diligently to ensure that on very tangible things. So when we are adjudicating scholarship applications, for example, everyone who is involved in that has gone through inherent bias training to ensure that we are looking at that through lenses that minimize our own personal biases. We're also trying to compose those committees with different lived experiences and ensuring that those perspectives are valued as we consider those. But I think maybe the most tangible elements that we're doing is, I have a vision for what the University of Waterloo can be in terms of a graduate community that is equitable, diverse, and inclusive. And maybe I can just share my own experience to say that I went to graduate school with really very diverse office mates and diverse peers in my cohort. And some of my most rich graduate student experiences have been because I shared my community with people who have come from very different heritages, backgrounds, cultures, identities than mine. And I think Waterloo will be really successful when its graduate community is a place where diversity and heritage is celebrated in a way that it becomes a peer-to-peer learning opportunity, where our international and our diverse graduate students, our equity deserving graduate students feel as empowered to celebrate their cultures, and we are as eager to learn collectively from one another as we can be. That to me is how I would like to see the graduate community function at the university, and we're eager to take those steps.
Thanks, Jeff.
Maybe I'll sort of speak from the COSM perspective. I think Jeff represented very well the ideas of what the university needs to do going forward, and what the university has embraced in terms of its overall efforts related to equity, diversity, and inclusivity as being a core value and component of everyday life on campus. We did have a number of recommendations that dealt specifically with issues related to equity and diversity and inclusion. So the recommendation number 11 was one that sort of dealt with the need to address issues related to cultural competency and having strategies in place for promoting mental health and wellness with a lens that takes into account the very diverse nature of our student population and staff and faculty as well. And then there's recommendations like recommendation number 14, which is about establishing and maintaining ongoing dialogues, that this isn't a one-time event, but that we put in place mechanisms to have discourse and dialogue around a variety of issues, including the intersection between mental health and other aspects of diversity as part of our normal ongoing day-to-day business in campus. This is something that we have to keep working at. It's not a one-time task and then we're done. It's being sure to be as inclusive and equitable as possible is sort of a job that we'll all have as members of the campus community on an ongoing basis.
Thanks, John.
I can speak next about some of the initiatives that Counselling Services has been taking. So I think our first was to train our whole of campus wellness. So our members of health services, health promotion, and counseling services on white privilege and whiteness. So that was one of the initiatives that we took as campus wellness. And then looking at our policies and procedures and our hiring practices, that's been something that we've been looking at, our interview questions, making sure that our postings are attracting a diverse population. So really looking at who's applying for our jobs and are we appealing to diverse and equity seeking groups. So that's been something that we've been doing. We've also incorporated what we call campus wellness reading groups. So they're more looking at literature around the effects of colonialization, and also anti-Blackness has been something that we've been doing as a group. So we've been doing more transformational approaches too, so that we're having dialogue as a service of how this relates to the work that we do with such a diverse student population. And also embedding equity, diversity, inclusion, and belonging into our committee structures within campus wellness. So making sure that we're incorporating that into the lenses, into the data that we collect, into our initiatives as a service as well. And I talked a little bit about the student advisory committee, making sure that we have diverse representation on that committee as well, that will give input into our services that we provide.
Thanks, Cheri.
Sure, I can add some additional stuff from a campus wellness and then a wellness collaborative. I think, yeah, I think we recognize we can do better. We need to do better as clinicians and as healthcare providers. So as Cheri mentioned, having this client advisory committee, of which there'll be space for graduate students, and to have, and working closely with some of our equity deserving groups like GLOW and RAISE and Women's Center, to constantly making sure that we are inclusive. And so we have a client satisfaction survey that we do every year as well. And we're able to pull data and to see which groups maybe we aren't serving well, and we could do differently, do things differently. The other thing we've recognized is we don't have any Indigenous health and wellness information on our campus wellness website. It's very Eurocentric, and we very much uses a European biomedical model to talk about health and wellness. So tomorrow we're actually meeting with the Indigenous office about creating more resources or links to maybe off-campus supports to support our Indigenous students with their health and wellness journey. The other thing I would say is we're working quite closely with the President's Anti-Racism Task Force, so PART. We have 2 members of the campus wellness team that are co-chairing the health and mental health working group of PART. So I think those are some of the things that we're doing. And then, as I said, with the wellness collaborative, I think we're trying to diversify our committee membership so that we can even just make sure when we're talking about any of the initiatives that we're doing, that we don't have blind spots there, and we're not a homogenous group that are thinking about health and wellness in the same way, that we have a variety of opinions or perspectives, I should say, and that if we need to do very targeted and tailored work, that we can do that and be responsive to what the students really need.
Thank you, Jennifer. Okay, so my next question for all of you, keeping in mind specifically grad students, who and or what accountability mechanisms are in place in your office or committee to ensure that A, programs and initiatives related to graduate student wellness continue to effectively move forward in the future, and B, student voices are being heard and implemented in the planning process?
Maybe I'll start. One of the things that we're working on now is to develop the proposed mechanism for continuity of the work of COSM that, among other things, will take into account implementation of the CSA Mental Health Commission standard on student mental health for post-secondary settings. So we're putting in place a mechanism like that. Whatever that mechanism is, it's going to have very strong representation of diverse student groups with it again. And what I'd say at this point is that nothing is fixed yet in terms of what that model would be. So I would be very keen to get feedback from GSA in general, as well as from specific students on their thoughts about what would be the good mechanism for continuing COSM's work with a focus more looking forward in terms of emerging mental health needs versus the work we're finishing on recommending or implementing the PAC SMH recommendations.
Go next.
Oh yeah, go Cheri.
Okay. So just a few things. One of the things that we've been doing is setting up regular meetings with the GSA. So that's been something that's been really helpful. So I've had meetings just in terms of counseling, but also campus wellness meetings with the GSA. So making sure that there's meetings with the leadership team, listening to any feedback and recommendations through those meetings. Another is reading over some of the surveys and reports that generate data from grad students. So making sure that I'm up to speed on those and reading some of those reports. Evaluating our services. So we have post-evaluation for many of our services. So making sure that we're paying attention to the reports that we're generating ourselves. And Jennifer mentioned our client satisfaction survey. So looking at the results, seeing if there's anything different coming out around grad students and their satisfaction with our services. And then as I spoke of, we will be implementing the client advisory committee. That will be something going forward. We'll be able to get lots of feedback around how we evaluate and the services that we're providing.
Yeah, and maybe I'll just to add on to Cheri, in campus wellness, we also have a quality assurance program evaluation committee, which is developing a pretty comprehensive performance measurement framework. And actually that's one of the action items in the new UW strat plan, is that we would develop this accountability framework. So setting indicators that really will help us measure how we're doing, and then following that quality feedback loop of saying, well, are we when we have these indicators, are we meeting best practice? Are we being responsive to student concerns? How are we taking that information and then setting new priorities and new benchmarks? So I think this performance measurement framework serves us quite well in campus wellness. And in addition, the Wellness Collaborative actually has, for the last 2 terms, has a Master's of Health Evaluation student working with us to develop an accountability framework for the Wellness Collaborative as well. And she's doing some network mapping analysis that will help us tell us if our goal is to better communicate and coordinate and collaborate on wellness across campus. She's going to be mapping whether we're doing that well. So we're trying to be, I think the lens I'm trying to bring to my wellness work at least is like being really accountable to students, to you as students, that we follow through on the objectives that we've set and keep measuring our progress and then learning where we can do better.
Great, thank you, everyone. My next question is, what barriers have your respective offices and committees experienced in providing graduate student wellness support?
Maybe I'll start again. So I think that the only I think one of the challenges that our graduate students experience, and I think that's a little bit on us that we need to be better about, is providing clear guidance on pathways to resolution for challenges as they arrive. I hope our students have gathered that we're all committed to this and there's a lot going on. But I think what might be lacking a little bit and what feels like a barrier to me is a lack of clarity for students on, sort of if the issue is X, then the path to resolution is Y. And I think it would be incumbent on all of us to work collectively to try and articulate really the most direct pathways. People have listened to me. I've often said, there is sort of as issues arrive for graduate students, I want them to start with their supervisor or their program director. They're often the people who are nearest to the situation and who can address those problems. If that doesn't feel comfortable for the student or that doesn't lead to resolution, then the next step would be their associate dean or their grad chair as an administrator whose job it is to help support them in the resolution of challenges. If that still doesn't feel comfortable, then it can come to us in graduate studies and postdoctoral affairs. But I think if there are issues in which it's a mental health issue, if it's a wellness issue, if it's a physical wellness issue, if it's a human rights issue, if it's a sexual violence issue, sort of having a single one-stop place where grad students can go to see what the mapping of sort of this is the issue I'm experiencing and this is the pathway I should follow, I think that would be really useful. And it would also probably give everyone around this table some comfort that there's not big gaps in the areas where we're able to provide services for grad students. So not necessarily a barrier for us, I don't think, but a barrier that we haven't yet resolved for our students.
Thanks, Jeff. And I just realized that I totally missed you for the last question. So if you'd like to speak on the last question as well, that would be great. My apologies.
I just said that we interact. I'm talking with grad students 3 or 4 times a week between senior leadership of GSA or visiting council or whatever else. So there's a regular dialogue.
All right. And who else would like to speak on this?
I can go next. In terms of what I would see as a barrier for grad students accessing our supports would be pre-pandemic. Pretty well, most of what we did was all in-person services. So for some grad students, they may not be on campus very often or during the hours that we were open. So access would have been a barrier, where now we're able to provide virtual and remote counseling. So I think we're actually more accessible now to grad students than we were before. And that includes our groups and workshops as well. And I think we're seeing through our grad student circle group that there's been more attendance and that it seems to be more accessible now that it's remote. So these are some of the decisions going forward to say what services will we continue to offer remotely so that there is greater access to grad students. That's the main one that comes to mind. The other is for people who are studying out of province. There are some barriers there. We're able to provide some services to people out of province or even out of country. So if somebody is in immediate crisis or they need really brief counseling, we're able to provide that. But for someone who needs more ongoing support, just because of us being registered in Ontario, there are limitations to what we can provide. So we would work with the student to meet the immediate concern and then make any referrals to supports in their own area. So that's another barrier.
I don't think I have anything else to add other than what Cheri said.
So what I'd say from the COSM experience is what we could have experienced as a barrier was the fact that the committee really didn't have authority or power to order anybody to do anything. So we were struck as a committee that was to implement 36 different recommendations, but it's not like we had magic wands where we could say, okay, now this must be done. And so what it relied on was, excellent cooperation and collaboration of all kinds of stakeholders from across campus to come together and do stuff. So in some sense, COSM has been more of a sounding board to evaluate what was being done by different stakeholder groups on campus to get recommendations done, give feedback and advice, and also make some linkages between folks that would have interest or relevance to a specific recommendation. So this thing that could have been a huge barrier of, well, we're a committee, but nobody reports to us, so to speak, wasn't a barrier at all because of what I think is really remarkable collaboration and cooperation and commitment across campus to take all those recommendations and bring them to life. So it's really been gratifying as chair to see the campus community come together that way with that common goal.
Thanks, everyone. Okay, I think being mindful of time, I'm going to start to get to the audience questions. And if we have time, we can jump to more discussion questions. But the first question that we have is specifically, I'm guessing, is for Cheri. So the student is wondering, for those who are dealing with clinically deep depression, what kind of specific services there are. I know you've talked about this a bit already. And if you feel that these services are effective for these kind of problems. And the student also notes that sometimes, especially in the graduate context, having this depression is sometimes mistaken for a lack of motivation or planning skill, they note.
Yeah, this is a great question, and really a common reason why somebody would access support from counseling services. So we see that the most common issues that students face are usually anxiety and depression, so mood, but other mental health challenges as well. So I would say that that's something that we are fully equipped to help. We work closely with health services, so if there was a need for a physician to be involved, or there was other issues going on, there's psychiatry as well, so we would make sure the student got connected to the support that they needed. And I think this question is very accurate, that often it can be interpreted as a lack of motivation, and it does impact studies, and that's very common, and we do all we can to help with the underlying issues, which would be the depression and some of the reasons that might be impacting the student's mood. So I would just encourage anyone that would be a very common and reason that students would reach out to our service.
Thank you, Cheri. The next question is specifically, I guess, for Jeff. So the student is currently an international student in a Master of Science program. And they're wondering, as an international student right now during COVID with the travel restrictions, if they want to go home and visit their family and they're being asked to pay the $2,000 and the self-quarantine, they're wondering what kind of support is available for that $2,000 and the place to stay for quarantine.
Yeah, thanks for that. So I actually don't know the answer off the top of my head. What I do know is that the university has in place a quarantine package that supports students who wish to come to Canada to study with us, and we are covering the cost of the accommodations when you arrive and so on, and there is a process. What's not clear to me is if this applies to students who are currently in Canada who wish to return to their home country and then come back to Canada. So if that student can email me after this, I will put them in touch with the immigration specialists in the Student Success Office who will guide their question and get them a definitive answer. So sorry that I'm not able to answer, but I'll be happy to connect them to the people who can.
The student has clarified that they are specifically asking about people who are already in Canada and they want to go back and come back. Yeah,
so I don't have the answer to that specific question, but I'm happy to connect them to the right person who will.
All right. The next question, I'm assuming, I guess, is for everyone. So they're wondering, again, about international students and how the resources are being formed around them during COVID with everyone being in different time zones. So I guess the question is, how are these kind of issues being addressed with like the time zone differences and, issues related to different internet access, things like that?
Maybe I can speak to the academic side of the house, because we were very careful about this as we began thinking about curricular elements. And then I think on the support side of the house, maybe Cheri or John or others can talk to that. So when we were thinking about how we would offer our curricula, we certainly were respectful of the fact that students are all over the world. And so we had long conversations as part of the academic community about whether or not our offerings would be synchronous. In other words, expecting that people would come together at the same time, or if they would be asynchronous, where people would be able to access them at the time and when it was convenient for them. And it's not necessarily limited to international students. They're also parts of Canada where internet is spotty during parts of the day. So we made a collective decision that having to access our academics synchronously was not going to be part of the way we were going to deliver our academic programming. So there may be elements that happen synchronously, but there are equivalent elements that happen asynchronously. So we took this really seriously, and if students are struggling to remain connected to their academics because of time differences or because of internet connections, they should speak with their instructor. The other point I'll make is just to say that we introduced the academic readiness bursary that we've been running now for 3 terms. That is financial support for students who needed to upgrade their potential to be connected. So if you needed headsets, if you needed a camera, if you needed software to connect, all those things were eligible to be funded under the academic readiness bursary.
Great, thank you, Jeff. This, I guess, is also highly relevant to Jeff as well. The question is about like grants and funding. Again, specifically for international students, there's concern over like the grants for international students not being enough, and there being too many restrictions, such as like a grant can only be accessed once during an entire study duration.
Yeah.
I was just wondering if you could talk a bit about that.
I'm happy to answer that question. I don't know if others had something to say first about the access to the university and the community for our international students before we move on to this question, or maybe I can provide an answer to this question and then we'll come back to that first one. How would you like to go, Ashley?
Yeah, you know what, if there anyone else that has something to say about the previous question, you can go ahead and then we can jump to the one that I just mentioned.
Cheri, could you talk about the off-campus online resources that have been put in place?
Sure. So we as I said, what are some of the restrictions to what we can provide, and what are some of the different services we can provide? Those either through video like Medio. We have that option. We've do Skype calls as well. So we've really tried to work around what is the best way to reach a student, so giving them different options. Also for students that are in different countries where there are time zone challenges, Empower Me would be a great resource where they have availability to provide counseling in 23 different countries. So they would be a good route. I did put their information in the PowerPoint so that students can access them as well. So they would be an option for internationally studying students.
Yeah, so recommendation 30 in the PAC SMH report dealt with off-campus support. So if you go to the website, that's sort of the scorecard for completion of PAC SMH recommendations. Just take a look at recommendation 30 and you can get more detailed description of what's in place, what was done in response to that.
All right, shall we move on to, I guess, to the next question?
Back to Jeff, I think.
Back to me, I think. Actually, I wanted to say something more about the first question, just to say that, again, in partnership with the SSO, we ran Grad Ready this fall and again this winter for incoming graduate students to try and foster that sense of community. And one of maybe the most important parts of the Grad Ready program was to introduce the incoming students to members of their existing cohort, whether that's from the same supervisory group or from the same program, just so that they had a peer-to-peer kind of opportunity to engage with students who may be physically present in Canada or have greater experience at Waterloo. So we tried to create that community. On the international student funding, thanks for that question. And we acknowledge that this is always challenging for our international students. We do have the contingency bursary that is, I think, very well funded. It's the budget for it every year is $800,000, and that is intended to support students who have unexpected costs. And that is correct that there is upper bounds on the amount that can be received as part of that contingency bursary. It is, I think, $5,000 for master students and $10,000 for PhD students. PhD students can receive it more than once, and I believe master students can receive it more than once, but the upper bound is still $5,000. I have to double check that, but I know that the upper bound is $5,000. We are always reevaluating those programs. I can tell you, if I'll be candid again, that program had been begun to be used in ways that it wasn't intended. We had a whole cohort of students from a single faculty who collectively in their second term was applying for that bursary. And it seemed that students had taken this as almost a given that this would be part of their funding package in a way. And so we did establish new rules around that to try and balance what we felt like was a misuse of the fund. But if students are truly struggling, the right thing to do is to talk with my office. Beyond the bursary opportunities, we have emergency loan programs. We are aware of other financial opportunities for students. So we're eager to talk with you. I can't make a promise that we can solve every one of the problems that arise, but we can certainly listen and provide advice. And where the university does have the wherewithal to support you, we'll certainly work with you.
Great, thank you. So a question I guess would be posed to all of you. I know you've all kind of touched on this already, but if you have anything else to add is, what has your office or committee heard from graduate students as being the biggest barrier in terms of student wellness, and how is your office or committee addressing this barrier?
So I think that for me, that's the ones that I touched on in my presentation, you know, the relationship with the supervisor, relationship with their programming, their funding. So let me just speak about what I think is challenges that our graduate students feel that I didn't talk about in there. And I think, you know, as graduate students, you're emerging from being recipients of information in some ways at the undergraduate level to the creators of information with much more agency over your scholarship at the graduate level. And that's a transformation for some. And it often feels, well, I know I experienced it and we hear a lot about it, that you're not quite sure when you're ready to actually take ownership of that. And there can be this imposter syndrome. This can be the struggle of having the agency and the confidence to move into your scholarship. And this is something we're trying to deal with head on through our office to really work with students as they emerge into their graduate program, to give them the confidence to take on the agency, to feel empowered about their scholarship, to share their vision for where they want their research or their coursework to go with their program or with their supervisor, and really making sure that supervisors are prepared to provide that kind of support for students to pursue their agency on their own academics. This is really what grad school is about for me. It's about taking ownership about something that you feel really passionate about and feel that you can make a contribution in this discipline. And that's what we're trying to do. But this imposter syndrome is real. This lack of confidence for students is real. This maybe this unstructured academic environment is a new phenomenon for many graduate students that makes motivation and progress more challenging, and students often find themselves not sure if they're making the progress that they should be. And so trying to reinforce good habits and trying to help students away from bad habits, that's something that we're regularly cognizant of and working with in the academic community.
So I would point to two issues as sort of major barriers or challenges for students and for the university. One is communication, the other is system navigation. Virtually any organizational issue that you look at, if we're talking about something that's a large scale issue that affects a pervasive portion of the population of the organization, will be affected by communication. It's how do you get information out to people about what's happening, what's being done in response to concerns, how do you engage people in that. With COSM, we've been able to engage stakeholders from across campus, but getting the word out to everybody through our COSM members, but through other mechanisms is a challenge, and always will be a challenge. So, you know, if we're trying to get information to people to explain how a specific recommendation has been acted on and implemented, what's the best way to communicate that? So we use websites, we use media resources, we use stakeholder linkages as a network of networks, but all those are imperfect solutions. And you know, we have 42,000 students to reach, 5,000 faculty and staff to reach. It's a massive job. And really on any topic, you'll find communication is always one of the major barriers of how to get that done. And it's just something that we have to keep working on. I think the thing that I've heard most often in my capacity as chair of COSM, that's an issue for graduate and undergraduate students, is system navigation of how do I know where to get help for this topic? Who do I speak to about this issue? And so even on the issue of the recommendation we have around dealing with challenges between supervisors and students, or instructors and students, we've got a very large array of mechanisms in place in campus to deal with that. But for a brand new student on campus to figure out, well, how do I use all that? It's pretty daunting as a challenge. So one of the things that we have to keep working on is how to get information into students' hands and minds about how do I get help for X when I need specific help, whether it's an academic issue, a mental health issue, a health services issue, or a personal issue around relationships or travel and that. That's a real challenge all the time, and it's not unique to this time period or this university. It's something that large organizations have to tackle and keep working at.
Yeah, and I'll just jump off what John said. I think exactly, like, I think the biggest challenge is that all graduate students are so diverse, whether they're doing their studies part-time or they're working on top of a full-time, they have a family. And so knowing there's so many great supports, but for a graduate student, potentially knowing where to go could be paralyzing. So I would just like to reiterate, like, there's no wrong door approach. If a graduate student is struggling and doesn't know where to start, I think GSPA, GSA, campus wellness, like any of those doors, just start there, because behind the scenes as employees, we are taking those things that come into us via email or phone. And if we're not the right one, like Jeff said earlier, we'll get you to the right person. That's our job. And I think the employees at UW genuinely care and have concern for students. And that is our job, to get you to the right place. So don't be overwhelmed with where to go. Just start somewhere.
Sorry, Jennifer, I just have to jump in there because that's so important what you've just said. And I think that the key thing is that if you're a student and you're unsure and you reach out to someone, the promise that I'm trying to fulfill at the university is that when you reach out to that, the person on the other end of that line is going to ask you, how can I help? And they're going to mean that sincerely, and they're going to work carefully with you and respectfully with you. If we get to that point where we can have that assurity that anyone you call is going to have that mindset, then we've created this campus culture that I've talked about, and I think that the Okanagan Charter is talking about. And that's really what I wanted to convey to students.
All right, Cheri, do you have anything to add? Or I have one more slight quick question as well.
No, I think after Jeff and Jennifer, that was just a really great message that I hope really resonated with grad students.
Okay, thank you, everyone. One last thing for Jeff. There is a student wondering if there's any time estimate on when the revamped policy 33 will be either approved or come back to the GSA for feedback.
Policy 30 or policy 33?
33.
So I haven't been as involved in policy 33. That's the ethical behavior policy, right?
Yes.
Okay. I can find out, as always. I don't know where it is in the approval process, but I will find out and get back to you. And probably I'll do that through David Bilodeau, the GSA president, and he can communicate to the membership.
Sounds good. All right, given it's 2:29, now it's time to wrap up. Thank you so much to all of our panelists for coming out and giving all these answers, all the presentation information and all the discussion answers. It was really useful. And thank you for everyone who came in to participate and ask questions. Again, this session was recorded, so it's going to be posted on the GSA website. And as well, as long as the panelists are comfortable with this, I'm also planning to upload the big slide deck that I couldn't manually click through myself, but they're all in there. But yes, thank you everyone again, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your days.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.